Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Isolation Interviews, only on Out News Global, with me, Rob Harkavy. Now, my guest today is an incredible young woman who, amongst other things, is a tireless and vociferous supporter and advocate for sex education. She has the ear of legislators in Westminster and Brussels, and has even represented the youth of Britain at UNESCO. I'm thrilled that she's taken out time from what must be an incredibly hectic schedule to join us today. So let's give a massive Out News Global welcome to Millie Evans. Hello, Millie.
Hiya.
Okay, now, thanks so much for joining us. And the first question is the same one that everyone gets, terribly unoriginal, but there we are. How has lockdown been for you?
It's not been the best. I'm a health journalist in my day job, so every day for the last year has been writing about, reading about COVID, and then obviously having to live through it as well is definitely interesting. It's not something I expected to be doing at 21. But you know, I've had it better than some people. I've been able to spend time with my family and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, it's been tough. Now, when I was at school, and that was pretty much in black and white. Sex education, the only sex education we received was really a biology lesson about how babies were made, which was no education at all. And so you kind of picked up stuff from the playground, which when I look back on it, some of it was hilariously misinformed. In fact, I will just tell you this one thing. There was a rumour zipping around my school. We must have been about 9. Obviously, it was an all-boys school. Obviously, somebody somewhere had heard about the concept of blowjobs. But the Chinese whispers among 9-year-olds was that women can get pregnant via their mouths. So that was my sex education. What does sex education in schools in Britain look like today?
Sadly, not much better, as far as my personal experience and the experiences of, the hundreds of young people that I've heard from and spoken to about it. I mean, the curriculum was until now. I mean, it's worth saying that the curriculum is now being updated. A new curriculum is coming in from September 2020. But before then, the last time it was updated was in the year 2000. So the education that I received is the same education as a 21-year-old, is the same education that people in their 30s would have received, and that children who are in school today or entering school today will have received as well. So things haven't really changed very much. That curriculum was extremely limited. And of course, 2000, we were still living with Section 28. And so there is next to nothing about LGBTQ plus sex ed within that curriculum. So still sort of playground rumours and playground gossip sort of rules most of sex ed at the moment, I think.
Just to be clear, if there's been no inclusion of LGBTQ education, what is it that outside those schools in Birmingham and elsewhere they were complaining about?
So that's about the new curriculum. So the new curriculum, which has come in from last September, that one is far more inclusive. It's still not what we wanted when we were campaigning for inclusive sex ed, but the very fact that it has a section which is about LGBTQ plus education was enough to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, and to put some parents' minds at rest, although I have to say that those sorts of parents probably aren't watching this, but you never know. LGBTQ sex education for younger pupils is not about the intricacies of anal sex between men. I'm guessing it's more sort of about loving relationships and everybody being valid. And so a lot of what we tend to hear in the press, or what some people have reacted to, is, I'm guessing, kind of based on a falsehood, really.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of preying on people's fears and people's sort of wildest imaginations. Really, it's starting from an early age, introducing the idea of different families, and those families could be all kinds of things. They might not be LGBTQ plus families, but families which have, one mum, or might have step parents or anything like that, as well as the idea of families which might have 2 mums or 2 dads, or might have parents who are trans, and then building on that and acknowledging the fact that we all have sexualities and that LGBTQ plus people exist, and what are the different issues that LGBTQ plus people might face, whether it's coming out, whether it's discrimination, anything like that. And then of course, like, we are going to be talking about sex between people of the same sex. A lot of the sex that LGBT plus people are having is the same sex that straight people are having, because, you know, straight people are still able to have anal sex. So we should be teaching everyone about how to be safe when they're having anal sex, and not just talking about it between two men.
Yeah, I mean, so you're really just sort of reflecting the world as it is. I mean, I can't fault it, but there is an argument that says that however unpalatable parental views are, that they are the parents, and it is quite difficult to balance education. I mean, I think all religion should be kept out of schools, apart from comparative religion. It's fine to teach about people's cultures and where you come from, but actually teaching religious doctrine and dogma, I think, is a step too far. But there is an argument that says, you know, schools are there to teach maths and English and science and stuff like that. And when it comes to personal relationships and personal morality, that's not for schools to do. That's for parents to do. And even if you and I don't like those parents' beliefs, they're not illegal beliefs. And I'm guessing that's the balance that people like you and legislators have had to find.
Yeah, I think there's two things with this. One is the fact that LGBTQ plus people are still going to exist whether people want us to or not, you know, and we have legal protections. We have, you know, we have things like gay marriage. We have various things which do protect us, and we have to teach kids about those laws. Those are laws. They're not things to be debated or questioned. And the other thing is that sex education, to me, and in the eyes of lots of people working in this space, is a human rights issue. And depriving children of this education in school doesn't mean that parents are going to be able to force their ideas onto their kids, whether I agree with them or not. Kids will still be able to go online and find out that information. They'll still be able to talk to their peers about it, and they'll just receive the information in a different way, in a less supervised and less safe environment. So really teaching it in school, having a curriculum which parents can look at, where they can talk to teachers about it and ask questions, that is a lot safer. And actually, when you talk to parents and explain to them what their kids are going to be taught, they're usually a lot more comfortable, and it's actually rumours and things which are in the press which scare them about sex ed.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned online, and we can't let this conversation go without talking about porn, because it's completely easy to access. There is no real age checks, anyone can do it, and much of it is far from vanilla. Now, there are arguments that say, I'd be very interested to hear your view, that a lot of more kind of extreme sex, if you like, is normalized to people who are sort of yet to have sexual relationships, from, you know, the non-existence of body hair to choking or whatever. Now, do you view that as an issue, and can something be done about it?
I'm not sure what necessarily can be done about it, because we've seen people try to introduce rules like the attempt to bring in sort of credit card checks onto websites like Pornhub wasn't ever going to work, and kids will still be able to access porn whatever happens. Not necessarily the issue. The issue is teaching them in schools and giving them the equipment, the like tools to be able to unpack what they're seeing. Because the scary thing about this extreme porn is that kids don't necessarily want to see it, but it is what they're seeing, and often it can be their introduction to sex. And recently I've been hearing from some slightly younger kids, maybe, you know, 13, 14, who say that they're really scared to have sex because they've seen extreme porn. And whilst, that's a genre which can exist for consenting adults to view, kids don't necessarily know what they're viewing. By talking about porn and unpacking the different elements of it, the fact that, you know, that extreme sex act that you've seen isn't going to be easy for you to achieve in the bedroom, because you know, not only are they sort of trained professionals, but also they've spent the day preparing to do that sex act, and that's not something that you know about as a teenager just from watching something on Pornhub.
We need to talk about mental health, and especially amongst young people. As well as doing this, I'm an ambassador for a charity, these are my personal life, not Outreach Global, called SOS Silence of Suicide. And the stats, I probably don't need to tell you, the stats about mental health issues, attempted suicide, suicidal thoughts, and sadly, actual suicide amongst young people are going through the roof. And for the purposes of this conversation, let's set the pandemic to one side. Difficult it is because it's here, but it will go. So it's an issue, but not an underlying issue. Here in the UK, and this is by no means a perfect place to live, but we have a country with free education, free healthcare, a long-standing and sophisticated regime of equality laws, a pretty good welfare state, a pretty good record on human rights, a free press, free speech, less racism than ever before, but there's some and we need to get rid of it, less homophobia than ever before, but of course there are still battles to be fought, and a democracy that allows us to kick out a government if we don't like them. There is a lot of work to do, Millie, but by any measure, people, young people, old people are better off than ever before. So why, in your view, and I know I'm putting a big question on a 21-year-old shoulders, but why do we think that we have this epidemic of mental health issues when, in comparison to recent times, things have never been so good?
It's difficult to say because obviously there are so many things which can cause mental health problems. But I think the very fact that the world has changed, but mental health care and mental health education hasn't, is really, there's really something in that. You know, the world has moved online. We're facing completely different pressures than before. There's the constant pressure to perform online. There's a constant pressure to know who you are, whether that's your identity or, you know, different parts of your personality. You know, there's the pressure from things on TV. And that's not to say that media is solely to blame, but there are different pressures, but schools haven't caught up, or really the education system hasn't caught up with those pressures. And so we're just not equipped to be able to cope with that pressure. And it feels also, the fact is that, yeah, we're living through a pandemic, and even if we put that aside, there's still the climate crisis. We're still having to take on the burdens of generations before us and try and solve problems which have just sort of been left to sort of fester. And now we're facing sort of the climax of all of that. And so there's a lot of pressure on young people from so many different areas. And then when they try and seek healthcare and seek mental health support, it's just not there.
Yeah, you should have tried growing up with the threat of nuclear Armageddon, but that's a different story. So, but you mentioned you mentioned social media, or is it a force for good?
Yes and no. And if I talk just about sex ed, I mean, my social media has sort of gone viral in the last month. And that's kind of what I always wanted the last few years, but now it's happened. I'm like, God, this is really unpleasant. And that's just on me as an individual. So for me, it's had like sort of positive and detrimental impact. But just in the sex ed world in general, there are so many people giving out misinformation online. So for every person that you have who's giving out correct, like medically accurate, you know, inclusive, positive education, there's someone who's doing the exact opposite. And the internet gives you more reach. So you can have that positive person reaching tons of people, but you can also have the person who's giving out the wrong information also reaching loads of people. So like there is no like, is it a good or bad force? I think definitely during the pandemic it's been a force for good in so many ways and keeping us all connected. But then, you know, the fact that vaccine misinformation has been allowed to spread and all of that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the internet.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I was referring really to things like bullying, where, you know, in my day, if someone was bullied, once you closed your front door, at least you could get away from it. But in this always on, and yours is the first generation to be always on. I mean, I've got a son who will turn 30 this year, and even he, you know, he's my child, and I'm not that old. Even he, when he wanted to go on the internet when he was growing up, had to go to the desktop in the corner, you know, and log on. You know, it was only really when iPhones and stuff came along, which was sort of in your youth really, that people were always on. And I'm really thinking of, there's no escape from these sort of Love Island-y unrealistic body images or bullying. And I mean, you can't, I don't want to be a Luddite, and you can't turn back the clock. I'm on social media and I like it, but I can't help thinking that it's as bad as it's good for vulnerable young people.
I mean, I agree, because I've met some people who I really, really love through social media. And then I've had sort of barrages of attacks, especially like homophobic abuse, transphobic abuse. And it can be a really unpleasant place, and especially when you are feeling vulnerable or you're in a sort of mentally vulnerable state, that can just sort of tear you apart. And you know, you can switch off your phone if you want, but you still need to have your phone on you to be able to stay in contact with your family. So like you say, you
Yeah,
are
yeah,
just always on, there is no escaping. And even
yeah,
if
yeah.
you curate your feeds to only see things that make you feel positive and make you feel like better in your body or in your sexuality or whatever, you're still going to come across people who do make you feel bad about yourself, and they're always going to exist. But we just have to see them more often nowadays.
Millie, the relentless march of time has beaten us. But I have to say that in a world where there's a lot of people of my generation are not always very supportive of people from your generation, you are a great example, and not just to your generation, but to all of us. I'm quite sure that we will be, not just Outnews Global, but all of us at large will be hearing a lot more from you in the future. But until then, this is me, Rob Harkavy, wishing you, Millie Evans, much love, luck, and happiness for the future. Thank you.